Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to today's DevOps.com panel, brought to you by TechStrong and the AI Infrastructure Alliance. My name is Cody J. Brown. I'm the host of TechStrong Learning, and we have an exciting program ahead. First, I do need to cover just a couple of housekeeping notes. Today's session is being recorded, so if you missed any of our discussion, maybe you'd like to rewatch or share with a friend, the on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude our live session today. If you have any questions, and we really hope that you do, we want you to send those in to us using the Q&A tab on the right side of your screen. Over on the right side of your screen, you'll also find the chat tab, and we'd like you to go ahead and start warming that up for us now. Let us know from where you're joining us or maybe what role you play in your organization. And of course, before we close out, we are giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, so be sure to stick around for the duration of our program. So our topic today is Out of the Ivory Tower, AI in the Real World. And I'm joined by Lee Baker, General Secretary at the AI Infrastructure Alliance, Dr. Vit Yakuchin, Principal Data Scientist and CTO at F33, Christopher Darcy, Founder at Ecompricer, and we have our very own Mike Vazar, Chief Content Officer here at TechStrong Group. So to our panel, thank you all so much for being here today. Mike, do you want to go ahead and get us kicked off?
Sure. Thanks, Cody. Welcome, everybody. I guess I want to start my first question over to Vit because it seems like every day I wake up, somebody's got some new massive AI breakthrough that's going to change the world. But when I look closer, a lot of it seems to be either in a research or a proof of concept, or it might be one of the big cloud companies that has inordinate amount of resources has done something compelling. What's your sense of where are we for the average enterprise, the average organization in terms of their ability to master AI? What are they thinking about and what are you seeing?
Yeah, so first, my background is that for the last 18 years, I've been delivering solutions as a service company, leader in the service company to the enterprises. So my point of view is biased towards this. So I was not working as a product company. So my understanding is that those enterprises are just after BI era, which means some of them can collect data and present the data and measure themselves, but they really are at the very beginning when they want to use ML. And what they do, mostly, they do a very basic improvements and the typical business processes. For example, demand forecasting in retail. So this is a huge gap between what is in research, not academia, because I say academia is a different field. Research in big techs and what I see at enterprise. They struggle with two things: people, technology, and processes. They have to learn all those three things to be successful in AI and ML.
Christopher, you want to jump in on this and maybe also give us a little description of what you guys do?
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so I run Ecompricer, and essentially what we do is we manage discounts for online sellers. So we essentially have an AI that manages prices in real time over a bunch of client websites. Which is, again, it's a great problem. We collect a lot of fun data, which allows us to do, a lot of actual fun work on this side. But as far as uptake, before creating Ecompricer, we were spun out of essentially a AI dev shop. And at least with the vast majority of clients that we worked with, there was, as is pretty true of the difference between, at least in my opinion, academia and industry, there was always a huge amount of beautiful data that you'd never get to interact with in academia without a ton of permissions. But the actual tools applied to looking at, to examining that data were very, very primitive. So there were many, many cases where, even, stuff that was built as an AI program would eventually, after a meeting, be realized as a regression, as a very basic regression. Stuff where even a basic regression would have helped, nothing at all was happening. There was essentially a lot of unused data. There were models that weren't put into production. There was, and what was put into production was extremely simple. Essentially a lot of the feedback we kept hearing is that stuff needed to be explainable to stakeholders. So when stuff gets, too complex, there end up being issues deploying that are really more organizational than technical.
Lee, you want to jump in here?
Yeah. So
yeah,
what I would comment here is that when you want to use ML model in business, my customers, when they think about this, the first question is if I ever need ML model. So I'm perfectly fine if they go with a simple solution, if that helps. But they really cannot ask the right questions to spot the places to use ML model. So I had customers that created models that were impacting, 0.5% of business. They were perfect from mathematical perspective, but from the business perspective, they were of low value. So what I see now that they they want to learn how to first build in-house expertise. And this is different from the last, 10 years ago. 10 years ago, no one was thinking about building in-house data science team. Now, most of my big customers are trying to do this. Second, they want to learn how to deal with innovatives or initiatives, which means they create a processes to manage this. This means educate business managers, teach them how to spot proper places for applying ML. And by the way, this has nothing to do with mathematics ML. It's about teaching them how to ask proper business questions, how to ask proper questions to measure outcomes, to measure, to find the bottlenecks, and say where you can get money by improving the process. If you know this, you can apply the model. This also addresses the need to explain, because business doesn't understand math. That was one of the first lessons I had. They don't want to talk about this. When I was first customer or first prospect, they didn't want to talk about equations. But what they want to talk is about how to make money, and that's the language they understand. So my experience is they don't care about the technology. I mean, business, IT department, they care. This is the toys they like to use, but the business people, no. So they need to learn how to define places in business area that can be supported by ML, but they don't want to, and they probably cannot, because of the different responsibilities, cannot understand ML. That's a huge challenge. So you want to use very sophisticated tool, a rocket, very fragile. I think Christopher can say a lot about, how fragile model can be. But on the other hand, they don't want to understand this because they want to, run with the business. Yeah. That's the challenge from my perspective. And of course, we have technology, like, MLOps platforms, all the stuff. But the technology, what I see, if I ask IT department, that's the first thing. But when I ask business, that's enabler. Oh, so yeah. You implement technology if you see the bottlenecks, because you cannot, for example, serve that many, for example, predictions that you need.
Exactly, Pete. Yeah. Yeah. And then there's also, so we've definitely been on the same page with that. Like we've, especially from honestly a sales perspective, making sure that salespeople can get into a meeting and identify where use cases are, for ML, and AI is, was very hard. We designed a set of documents that really looked at, general forms of problems and, essentially couched a lot of it in terms of optimization. How much do you lose by not being able to forecast when a customer is going to leave? How much will reducing, attrition 10% help you from that standpoint? So that was the sort of stuff we really worked towards. But from a bit, even when we ran into businesses that were happy to throw huge amounts of technical resources at problems, when there was, management doesn't often have a great grasp of math or statistics, which does lead to, we find all the time, especially in finance work, multiple comparisons issues. So cases where 20, 30, 50 models have been built, people are building models, with kind of reckless abandon, testing, training and testing. And just by sheer luck, out of dozens and dozens of models tested, some perform well in the validation sets, and then they go into production and completely flop.
Yeah. I mean, so you said two interesting things from my perspective. One is the magic word called optimization. So, when you ask me in what field I'm real expert, I'm in, mathematical optimization, integer programming, constraint programming, meta-heuristics. And what is special about this, what I have learned about ML and AI in general, is that forecast and prediction is of almost no value. Why? Think about how people are making decisions, like, planners. So you have to plan a replenishment, or you have to plan a marketing campaign, or even pricing. So what we do, we look at the past, try to learn what has been working, what was working in the past, guess at our intuition and say, okay, so it worked in the past in this situation, so we claim it can work in the future. This is forecasting. This is what ML is doing. So having this information that maybe this price would work is just the input to making a decision. And what I see and my experience is that most of the implementations I did had 2 or 3 components. So one was forecasting some information. It could be demand, it could be price. And second was optimization model that was generating recommendation. And this recommendation was given to the human being that made a decision. And the important thing is that only when you make a decision, you generate a value for business. Exactly. So very often when I get a customer and they say, hey, we are retail and would like to do demand forecasting, like we need to improve forecasting accuracy, I ask them, okay, so imagine I give you a perfect model, no error. How do you make money out of it? And, now when I ask this question, then when they start answering this question, the real discussion starts. So, when you think how you want, for example, what are the challenges when you deploy a model? My biggest challenge is to deal with, people that read that, forecasting accuracy is the most important to be solved, while the real value in the business is next thing, next decision in the chain. And that's a huge effort we do with all our customers to teach them, hey, give me the whole perspective. Because without this, we can end with the project, you pay money, we send you an invoice, but when the CEO comes and say, hey, I just spent, $2 million USD for forecasting and MLOps and all the stuff, and there is no result in our inventory stocks. Why is that?
Well, on that topic of cutting checks to support your ML ops, so my organization, the AI Infrastructure Alliance, was built around the idea of, could you make it easier for practitioners to use kind of some of the best of breed tooling that's out there? But that speaks to, a significant tension that a lot of enterprise organizations have, which is, do I build it in-house? Do I lean on kind of best of breed vendors, or do I kind of aspire to the holy grail of a all-in end-to-end platform that does everything from labeling, training, deployment, production, and probably takes my clothes to the laundrette? How do I reconcile those tensions of what's the tooling that I should use? How much do I take on board in terms of technical debt in-house? How viable is it to go all in with a hyperscaler who can handle everything end to end? Christopher, what's your experience of articulating the specific needs and how and what you should cherry picked from the from the ecosystem?
I mean, from a standpoint, yeah, I think if you can make the ROI justification where, the spend will optimize something enough that you will make money on it, you should really clearly go for it, and you should just really pump as much money in that direction as you can. I think in practice, getting people to, especially when there's services available that can kind of perform particular tasks, we do, it's very hard to go and convince, a CFO that, yes, a $2,000 a month of spend with this service can kind of solve this problem for most of the companies they work with in some capacity, but you're also leaving a lot of optimization and fine tuning on the table. It's there's such a big cost jump between those options that it become real meaningful differences often get overshadowed a lot. So we've had it's always a very delicate conversation explaining to someone, for example, that yes, there are synthetic data generation tools, but you have very specific data types, and you have very specific outcomes that you need. So you do need to pay 10, 50 times more to actually get this done right. I think honestly, at the end of the day, for the amount of value that can be generated, off the shelf doesn't always make sense. And, it's very, the big challenge really is communicating exactly how much value that is, especially because, with a lot of these models, when you build them bespoke, you can't guarantee the performance level ahead of time. Sometimes data is just very hard to predict, or again, giving someone a fixed range is a fantastically easy way to either, wildly overperform on your benchmarks or get sued, depending on how a project goes. Vit, do you have any input?
Yeah, so regarding technology and tooling, what I hear from CEOs, we don't buy toys for engineers. That's the very simple message I get. So if I approach them and say, hey, I would like sell MLOps platform to you, we can do this, they say, come on, we are not buying toys for engineers. That's their perspective. They don't understand that. So how we approach this challenge? Because this, what you said, Christopher, of course, maybe you don't need this to have full featured platform, but when you think about organizations that want to use AI and ML for large scale, many departments build in-house expertise, they need a tooling for that. They cannot go with notebook on a laptop. So you have to sell this tooling. But my approach and what I think works is, again, go back to business, find a good business case that's huge enough for organization to sponsor this. That's the only way I see to do this, because otherwise it's not possible to deliver. Yeah. Unless you have organization that is very technology aware and CEO understands that, of course.
We have a question from the audience that kind of dovetails into this, so I'm going to drive to it now. But the question kind of is the math fundamentally different if I'm, say, a startup and it's a new business that I'm trying to create something with that's AI driven versus retrofitting an older business model that is, an enterprise company that might have years of business models underneath it? Is that a different kind of justification model than it is if I'm a startup? Christopher, do you got a thought there?
Oh, yeah, actually. Well, when we interact with businesses that already have processes, if the process that we're interacting, so, let's pretend it's default forecasting, is a nice example. If the business has a good way already to forecast default, for so for some set of entities, and they care about optimizing that. What we'll do is actually go and take those stakeholders' inputs as an actual input to the model. So in many cases, when we're dealing with cases where there are people at the business who make decisions that are actually good at making those decisions to begin with, or there's processes that already work, we'll build models that sit on top and essentially make adjustments to things that are recommended. So in more of the enterprise pricing stuff that we do, so moving away from e-commerce, we also do work with groups like law firms and realtors. And in these cases, they already have a good idea for what price they should be charging for things. And it's going to be about a very, very complex thing that would be a nightmare to just treat entirely with a model from scratch. What we can do is we can start making adjustments and nudges to the actual prices that would be charged. So instead of sitting down and in this example, so instead of sitting down and taking a ton of legal documents and spitting out a quote, we take those legal documents, the features we can extract from them, and the anticipated quote, and then nudge that depending on the direction needed. So in that case, it's taking existing processes and optimizing. With a new startup, and those processes aren't proven though, so if someone wants to be forecasting defaults and they don't necessarily have a strong track record of doing it, we of course, prefer to just do the thing from first principles, just, grab in as much data as we possibly can, buy access to as many feeds as we can, and make the best predictions we can out of that. So we do like to conserve what exists in older businesses, because a lot of times it has real value. And we really try and work with that. It also stops people panicking, thinking that we're going to rapidly try and rate them out of a job, which no one likes. It doesn't make it easy to get models embraced by the people there. Do you have thoughts on it?
Yeah. So from my perspective, there are no big differences. Why? Because what you said, to apply ML, you need a business process, because ML is a tool to optimize business processes. So whether it's established or a new entity, you have to start with the business process. Of course, as you said, there are some differences when you think about if you have enough data, if you have best practice inside organization, that can help or make it harder. What is hard when you have established entity are people, which means, they are divided in, different departments. They don't talk to each other. That's the biggest challenge when you want to apply for such organization. But from ML and methodology, it's all around the process. So I don't see a big difference here. And I think it can be applied to both. What is easier with new entity? So, I'm in Poland. So in Poland, like, mobile banking is very well advanced compared to USA. So from my perspective, when I visit USA, you are like, 10 or maybe more years behind us. And it's not because we are more developed country, because we started later. So we started using more advanced technology because it was available and we had no legacy. So that's maybe a new entity can benefit, not dealing with old, technology stack or habits. That's because they are starting from scratch. But when you think about value from ML, that's the same challenge.
So I want to ask a follow-up on that, because with any new technology or new paradigm, you see organizations leap on that and decide that they're going to be a .com company, or they're going to be a social media company, or they're going to be an ML center of excellence, and they, if not forget, perhaps a strong word, but so that they neglect their core business. At what point do you have to advise an organization that it's probably not in their interest to sink cost, time, and recruit engineers to build out ML expertise when actually they should outsource that and focus on their core business. You know, how do you have that conversation, or do you even need to have that conversation? And what are the signals that a business is not ready, not fit for purpose, or shouldn't be wasting time trying to build something out that potentially they can outsource for less expense and faster return?
So,
Vit, I'll start with you.
Yeah. So outsourcing is buying time. That's what I think mostly. So there are, I think a week ago I had a very similar discussion with a customer. So the CIO of a huge big enterprise. So his question was, where should data science or machine learning should be located? Is it business or IT? That's first choice. Second was external or internal expertise. And my answer to this is a strategy of company. So those are strategic questions, strategic decisions. If you can make a strategy that makes you different to your competitors, like you can build internal, and this internal expertise makes you different, helps you win with your competitors, that's good. If you don't need this, you can outsource. For example, if your main core business is create a hardware, and you create software where with ML as an add-on, that's easy to outsource. If your core business is to sell goods and pricing is also part of it, you should have expertise inside, because even if you buy from outside, you should have brain in your company, because that's where you win. You cannot win with someone outside. So my answer is strategic choices to make the company winning, and there is no one solution to
that. I'd agree with that. The strategy choices are important. I think the quality of the hires available is also a really significant factor. I mean, there are cases where I've interacted with businesses where, they have a real need for a good, AI and data science team, and they have a team, but it really is one of those things where you can't hire people who aren't extremely competent to begin with. At the end of the day, a lot of these models, good humor and likableness don't really function very well when you're trying to make a model that predicts well. And often people who have reskilled from existing developer jobs without any kind of real statistics or mathematical background will come in and then attempt to do the right things, which will work in some situations, but then you can also end up spending, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for a handful of employees that cluster your data, make a few visualizations, and create a forecasting tool that doesn't work, despite everyone's best efforts. I think really the quality of the people coming in is the real key thing. And for the number, and there's just very few people really available to do these jobs effectively. So, and you're competing with, well, less these days, but for a long time, you were really competing with Google, Amazon, Microsoft will take them up, Samsung will buy up in droves, IBM, who are all going to be offering enormous salaries, and really strong work environments where people can continue publishing. So I think most businesses a lot of businesses, especially businesses that have some kind of technical product, could benefit immensely. Having someone sitting there all day, every day, optimizing your processes will almost certainly make you money. But in practice, it's almost impossible to find the right people to go and onboard. And it's also incredibly hard to correctly vet those people. If you don't have, a strong AI background yourself, it's very hard to be able to sit down and say, this guy has the skill set that will actually work, and this guy does not. You know, and you only really,
you are talking about very, very important things. So, like, you have a company with 5 departments. One department is huge department. They can afford having a lot of ideas for machine learning people, so they can keep them. But there are small departments, like they have very small need. Then there is a question, how to hire a person that can work with them. That's also a challenge, how to deal with that. So on the other hand, not everyone wants to work for big techs, even if they pay a lot. But I agree, companies think that if they hire a person, and now we have a new type of employee that had a studies or university course around data science or machine learning, if they hire such person, they are using ML. I agree with Christopher. No, they are just hire a junior person that doesn't know how to generate money from what they know. So we need to wait, because the world has changed, and the education is and academia, I think, is following the trend because they are teaching. So probably in few years we'll have better structure of employment, and the same has happened with IT, software development. Maybe 30 years ago, ability to write a computer program was a very unique skill, and to write a valuable software was also unique. So I think it's changing now, and it will be more and more better.
We have a question from the audience that kind of dovetails with this topic as well. And it kind of speaks to there are so many vendors out there with so many platforms, and they do everything from soup to nuts. And the question is do you need that to get started? Is there a subset of things you should focus on? Or for that matter, should you separate the data science and the data engineering, and maybe outsource the data engineering and just do the data science? It seems like there's a lot of things to navigate. So what's your best advice to folks? Christopher, start with you on the platforms. What do you think?
I mean, honestly, a math textbook and a Python installation will get you a lot further than, just randomly signing up for platforms and trying your best to integrate them. At the end of the day, a lot of machine learning is just really a very nice word for applied statistics, which if you don't understand, the basics from a statistical standpoint, you're not going to be able to effectively do things no matter what model you get. So if your departments are already struggling to do, or if you want to get started with this and you can't already run something simple like a t-test, that'll show, or like test for differences between groups, which can be done in Excel, then you're not going to necessarily get benefit by taking more powerful tools and blindly applying them, especially when you have stuff that matters as the outcome. It's one thing to produce, cool results that show up in a dashboard and have all sorts of plots associated with them. But when they actually don't function well in a business case, then you've suddenly got a situation where you've got a complicated platform, that isn't performing right, that you've dumped money into, and you don't know why it isn't performing right. I'd honestly say, as lame as it sounds, just going through, honestly, MIT keeps its course, its math course is open access. Oxford, you can go and get, any of the undergrad course notes are freely available. That really would be the maneuver to start with. It isn't necessarily a case of spending a ton of money on investing in stuff will get you better results. Just really understanding what you're doing before you do it will go a long, long way.
Vit, you want to add to that?
Yeah, so if you want to start be a shop owner, you don't start opening 10 shops and then thinking what do you want to sell. So I completely agree with Christopher, and maybe we are biased, but but I'm a mathematician, so I say math is first for, you know, creating ML solutions. But I think technology, to use technology, you have to be mature enough to understand why you need this technology. And I will give you a simple example. I had a customer that approached me and wanted to build an MLOps platform. They have very senior ML engineers on. They have very senior ML engineers on board, but still, you know, they couldn't make the first step. And the issue was that, you know, the marketing around platforms doesn't help. So one issue they had, they wanted to use feature store. This is a, you know, idea of sharing features and helping models to consume features to avoid some problems on production. And in their situation, there were no feature store on market that could fulfill their needs. And, you know, they were completely blocked because of that. Because they thought that they should use it, but they couldn't decompose their need to decide. And they maybe were afraid to decide, I don't know, but that's the issue. So, you know, we came to the solution just, you know, using a simple thinking. And they created their own solution without any technology from the market. But if they bought any feature store from the market, that wouldn't work.
Right. One of the questions that I hear from a lot of folks is they kind of think that they build an AI model and they're done. And there's this concept of drift, and that things change and there's new data sources that emerge. And so, you know, Christopher, is your experience that folks don't really account for drift and don't have a set of processes for managing that whole thing and how we're going to upgrade that because they're kind of not even aware that it exists?
Yeah, there in a lot of cases there aren't processes set up for that. Things don't continue training, which is kind of you know, a little grim, you know, especially when you consider what these models are supposed to do. That's a big chunk of it. At least in our case, you know, in order to really manage that, you know, essentially what we found a lot was the better move was, in many cases, we just take models entirely away from the tech teams that you know, that were associated with them, host them on a server, and then just make sure that there was a data feed, and we keep training them, and then spit out results by API call. You know, it is definitely, a model needs to be, you know, you need to be able to account for drift. You need to be able to make changes and updates as well. You know, at some point, the business is going to get, you know, new inputs. They're going to have changes in formatting, some things, or they will have issues. You know, some things just going to entirely drop out, and you need to be able to manage that in an effective way. You know, and, you know, effectively managing that is not just jamming a model, you know, a pre-trained model deep in some code, you know, and hoping it stays functional forever. You know, so we like, you know, drift isn't well managed, but at least in our case, we recognize that, you know, business people have more, you know, they have a lot of stuff going on, and it's not number one on everyone's priority list. So, yeah, whoever's aware of it should really take pains to make sure that it can be dealt with effectively. No one else is going to do it.
All right. Yeah. Fit, you want to add to that? Are you seeing a lot more drift these days already?
So the drift is not a feature of model. The drift is a feature of phenomena we are trying to forecast. So, you know, we use data, and data can change. And, you know, if you think, for example, about banking, so banking are very advanced regarding, or mature regarding ML, not advanced, mature. So they have been dealing with drifts for many years. Because if you build a model, you see drift very fast, that the forecasts are of not that quality that you expect them. And then you dig down to understand why, and very often it's because of input data. So yes, I see a lot of drift, and this drift can be due to errors in data, due to some disturbances in IT system, and it can be just a business. Like, you know, my competition made a promotion, so suddenly, you know, the world has changed, and as you, Christopher, you have this pricing solution. probably you see that, your customer using your solution can see that maybe their competitor started
exactly.
making some counter actions, and you see that it's just changing the world. So, yeah, and I agree, building solutions that can adapt are very difficult, really.
Well, you mentioned data, and so that goes to one of the questions that's coming in from the audience. It's about the data strategy and the processes, and is that where I need to start first? Because that drives the models, and yet in my experience, very few companies I know would get a good housekeeping seal of approval for the way they manage data today. So, Christopher, do we need to start with old-fashioned data management?
Yeah, I mean, from a data management standpoint, we have we have internal processes to track and make sure that everything's at least organized in some way. These days, honestly, it's not as bad as it really could have been by this point in time. The fact that there are so many data engineers out there, the fact that people do really care about their data lakes and and actually making sure that data is contained somewhere and that the data itself is legal. The amount of people who actually obey regulation is fantastic. I think, a lot of times we actually do interact with, companies that have a pretty good handle on getting their data in and organized and logged and making sure it's error-free. And that really should be a key thing for especially anyone starting out, but also it's not a difficult thing to do. There should be, it's the data engineering side of things, as long as you're not working with a system that is, complicated to the extreme and, perpetually changing, actually fairly straightforward and something we definitely recommend people have a go at.
Vin, do you want to jump in? And I'd like to add a question to that. Are we getting better at training the AI models using less data so that data management doesn't become as heavy a problem as it was early on? And maybe the whole thing is becoming a little more accessible because?
So you cannot have ML without data management. That's very simple. And I agree with Christopher that organizations know how to manage data, and this knowledge is available. And as I said at the beginning, we are just after BI era, and business intelligence, reporting dashboards. Those solutions taught organizations how to deal with data, and old warehouse is the answer how to manage and organize the data. So when you build warehouse, you have a best practice, how to control the data quality, the processes around that. So I think it's available. Second, there are data governance processes and general data governance. This is about ownership of the data, especially in bigger organizations. That's very important. So if some department is producing data and the other department is trying to consume, and consumer sees that the data is not of high quality, they should have a process, escalation process, so they can improve that. That's mostly process issue, because from the technology point of view, I think we know how to solve this. It doesn't mean it's easy. It means we know how to solve this, but we have to do this. And some organization does it better, some worse, of course.
All right, no substitute for a little work there. You both mentioned APIs, and so we see or we hear a lot about ML ops, and of course we have DevOps processes for building the application. So, Christopher, are we getting better at kind of aligning those things where I can just call an API to access the model, and I don't have to be a rocket scientist from the development side to do all this stuff? And what is there? How do we insert these models into these applications and processes?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we've always been a big fan of making sure that as much as can be taken away from the customer so that we can just make life easy, we like to do that, so, and especially given that from a, more technical standpoint, pretty much everyone is building things in either TensorFlow or PyTorch, and really spinning up a Flask server takes no time at all these days. If you have a production-ready model, it is much easier to just take that, set it up on a Flask server, and then run that, in the cloud somewhere and have people call in by API, rather than, trying to set a model running, integrating it within code, that other people are working on is hard. And there's a risk of someone else breaking it by accident or it not being set up right. With an API, it's very clear what it's doing and how it's doing it. You can always update it, independent of what other people are doing. Things can, usage can be tracked as well. Performance, if you have a way to get feedback, it also can be tracked. Get, live edits. But yeah, I think really just, once it comes to actual usage of a trained model, that definitely is becoming easier and easier. I think the GPT-3 stuff is a great example. Everyone, it's a very big, complicated model that everyone loves to talk about, and it's available via an API call. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to use it. And that really should be the standard for, most AI and ML models. You shouldn't be having difficulty implementing it. It should just be an API call.
Vit, you agree with that? Is it getting easier to kind of afford all this?
So Christopher said about two things. So one, using API to serve models to other components of IT infrastructure. I agree that's the good best practice. Sometimes, unfortunately, I had situation that I had to integrate with a code. So deployment was really a code or PMML. So they could run this because of performance. But again, this is not 60%. This is rather close to 10% situation that I need to be very fast. So that's one thing. The second thing, when we talk about GPT, I say that it's not the question, it's not the choice, because there are very few companies that can build high quality large models. So if you think about language models or computer vision models, very few companies can do this. So it's a future, and we'll be using APIs to optimize our businesses with calling APIs. That's how it will look for some type of models. Mostly, as I said, in language, in computer vision, there can be solutions like Christopher's is creating. So if it's well defined, it can be closed, it can be reused by different companies. Yes. Sometimes, unfortunately, you have to build it from scratch because the problem need is different. And it's very difficult to change it. But especially big models, only API and only this way a broad audience can use them.
So Vit, if the future is forgive me, my video isn't working, but if the future is open API calls and everyone is a citizen data scientist, does the value then become in the uniqueness of your data and the sophistication of your ETL? Is that where businesses will increasingly focus their efforts?
So first, I said that future is mostly for big models. Second, I see the trend that companies understand that prediction is not enough. There is a concept of digital twin. And what the concept says, it says that you create a computer model of part of your business. It can be, production line that is composed of three parts. So one is ML model, and it can be, API, of course. Then you have optimization model, and it's very difficult to have API for optimization model. And then you have a simulation model. And so I think that advantage will be built around, of course, data. The data you collect, so you can tune the API models but second, how you can identify business need for your model and leverage. So, for example, what we do, I can use API for computer vision to generate a metadata and input this into a logistic regression model. This way, I can very fast have a very, very sophisticated solution that can solve complex business problems. And I don't have to spend money on GPU because it's just API code. Of course, I have to add a second layer that adapts this model to a local need. And for this, you need not really citizen data scientists. I would say mostly statistician data scientists. So they understand how to build a proper validation or experiment for the models.
Yeah, exactly. I think, just being able to know when to apply stuff is really key. I think having more data is great. Having a cool architecture is great, but being able to apply the correct architecture to the correct problem with the correct data is actually crucial. It's not so much that you have available, a supercomputer and the deepest network known to man, as well as a live feed of all the data you can find anywhere. What really matters is knowing it's the right kind of network to actually tackle a given problem. So honestly, from where, I think the gold standard, at least for, when you're serving these models by API, really is making sure that people get the solutions to the problems that they have, not necessarily making a model that takes in a number and spits out another number. Yeah. So in the case of, so in our case, our system, it takes in user data and it will output a set of discounts. That's what you need from us. We set discounts and manage discounts. We don't need to send you back an API call that gives the predicted income of the user versus the expected price point for the site. That's not helpful to anyone. In the same way that essentially, and I hate using it as a repeated reference. It's just the one that everyone knows right now. GPT-3, again, it takes in a prompt, that's going to be, it doesn't need to be structured in any fancy way, and goes and outputs some text, which is just what people want. Really drawing people as far away from the actual technical component is crucial, especially if they're not data scientists or statisticians or mathematicians.
All right, well, speaking of that, let's just follow up that a little bit. So we hear everybody talking about the democratization of AI and data science, and I can be a business analyst. Heck, some people are like, you can be an end user now and create your own little data model somewhere. Are we on the cusp of perhaps too much of a good thing now because we don't have a lot of visibility into these black boxes that nobody knows how they're governed or what went into that or what bias went into that? So, Christopher, what's your sense of looking forward into your crystal ball for the coming year? Are we going to have an explosion of these models everywhere?
I think, honestly, if I had to guess based on my experience, we're going to be approaching the next few years where a lot of, businesses on the larger side of medium have experimented with data science teams where they found someone who's taken a Udemy and, has half of a botany degree. And they've realized that these are expensive and don't necessarily produce value. I think what you're actually going to see is a lot of companies who've tried it are going to move away from it, and it's going to be harder to bring them back. I think the democratization of AI, is a difficult topic. On one hand, it would be great for everyone to be able to build out these tools and be able to work with them in a meaningful way. But on the other hand, people need to go and sit down, as really lame as it is, people need to sit down and be able to actually understand what they're doing, before using these correctly. And when people don't, you get bad outcomes from a business standpoint, because it really is, no matter how fun it is or how cool it is, or your ability to do well on a toy problem, on a Kaggle competitions, when it comes to real life stuff where profit matters, what really matters is this statistically valid? Will this function well in future when you're not just testing and retesting and editing and changing things based on what's failed, and you already have the validation data? That's kind of my thoughts on it. Again, it's not as optimistic as it really should be. I know everyone's got these bright views about how everyone's going to be sitting down building a neural net in their spare time to optimize their laundry cycle, but it's I don't think that will happen in the same way that we've had lots of statistical tools for decades and 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 decades. And people have repeatedly not used them and ignored them, or applied them in the wrong sorts of ways.
All right, Lee, we got time for one last question. You want to take a shot at it?
Yeah. So gazing back into those crystal balls, what are the big trends that are going to impact ML over the next 2 to 3 years? And where do you see your business in that context?
All right. Just so everybody knows, you got a grand total of 60 seconds each to answer that question.
Oh, cool. Do you want to go first?
Jed, you go first?
Yeah. So 2 years, I think we'll see next progress in large language models and maybe continues in computer vision. But this is fun to watch. I don't think it's 2 years. It will change a lot in my area. Maybe I can see democratization appears as people understand and are more curious about using AI. And I expect to have more aware and mature companies that tried, failed, or succeeded with ML. So I expect this will be more and more towards commodity solution and services.
All right. Great. Christopher, 30 seconds or less.
Awesome. Yeah, I feel like what we probably will see is a lot of reinforcement learning actually making more of its way into the market. All the people who have been doing their PhDs and their postdocs are kind of getting into industry now. And there really is a lot of application for that kind of thing on, like especially the e-commerce side. You've got stuff that varies in times. You've got repeat customers. You've got lots of issues with how your actions affect, what will happen in the future. And I really think that is the right set of tools for that kind of problem.
Great. Cody, take us home.
All right, Mike, thank you so much. And thank you to Lee, Christopher, and Vit for joining us today as well. Really appreciate all the time that goes into not only your expertise, but you joining us for this hour. So really appreciate you being here.
Awesome. No, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a great discussion.
Thanks, Cody.
I had a great time.
So a quick reminder to our audience that this session was recorded. So should you want to rewatch, you will be receiving an email with a link to access this recording on demand, or you can find it living on the DevOps website at devops.com/webinars. So we do still have those 4 $25 Amazon gift cards to give out. Our winners are Anuradha M, Marco P, Alexandra K, and Keshav K. So to our 4 winners, please keep an eye on your inbox to claim your gift card. But if you don't happen to see that email, please do check your spam folder. I'd like to thank AI Infrastructure Alliance for sponsoring today's program. And to our audience who's been with us for the past hour, thank you so much. We really value your time, and we also really value your feedback. So as soon as we close out, there will be a webinar survey that will pop up on your screen. So we'd really appreciate your feedback there. Let us know what you liked about our program or maybe what you'd like to see on future programs. Otherwise, we hope to see everyone at an upcoming TechStrong Learning program. Have a great rest of your day. And Christopher, Vit, Lee, Mike, thank you all once more.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.